Hi everyone, in this video I will be showing the hip flexor ROM, also known as the Thomas test. In this video you're going to see two different types of tests, one that is really measuring the iliopisiasis, I'm not sure if I said that right, and the rectus femoris for the second one. So hip flexor tightness can contribute to anterior pelvic tilt and limit performance in running and jumping. The modified Thomas test is a reliable way to assess both the iliopisiasis and rectus femoris. So let's get into the step by step. So here you're gonna see me talking, but none of what is coming out of my mouth was right at the point. So I had to redo it. So that's why I'm doing a voiceover. So right now I'm going to be showing the Thomas test, but testing the iliopisiasis rather than the rectus femoris. And what I'm going to have her do is one leg is going to be fully extended while she's performing hip extension on one side and then hip flexion on the other, with her leg being flexed and remaining her feet in neutral. So key things to look out for obviously is to keep the thigh on the ground or wherever you're at, mat, table. I had to do it on a table. Then also you want to make sure that she's reaching for her chest as much as you can, and you're testing basically whether the hip is extending or not. And now I'm going to switch to the other side. That being, I'm testing her left side now because the left is the one that's going to tell us if the hip extends. You can also see an error that possibly occurred, and you'll see later in my measurements that her leg is drooping, so it's hard for me to measure, but overall she had great hip extension. Now we're going to be performing the second version of the Thomas test, where it's testing more of the rectus femoris, where her leg is going to remain bent. So you're going to see in a minute. I'm going to start by bringing her one leg up, and she's going to hold it at her chest, and she's going to hold it for me. She has way more better leg flexibility on this side, and her left leg is going to remain down and bent in 90 degrees. I think because of the table we were on, it was kind of hard for her to keep that leg remain bent, or she should have slid down a little bit more. That's error on my part. But she did have very good hip flexibility and everything. So now we would switch. And I also noticed that when her leg became closer to her chest and I pushed it a little bit more, her thigh did come up. So that could mean that she has some sort of like restriction within her hip, or her rectus femoris is tight. But now I'm going to switch over to the opposite side. She's going to keep that leg bent while we're testing the rectus femoris, and she's going to bring that knee to her chest and consider like knee flexion. And she does remain on the table at all times, so I do give her props on that. So this is the first version. I wanted to show closer photos of me and how I got my measurements. I obviously have 3 degrees here for the iliopisiasis and how she's stretching it. For the first one I had 3 degrees, as you saw, but now this one I have 5 degrees, which you're going to see now in my results why I feel like maybe with the smaller numbers it's a different error of measurement, and maybe the asymmetry index is kind of hard for you to understand it in a way. I don't think it's as accurate like in other forms of flexibility assessments. But for my results, the individual's name was Malaya. She was 22 years old. I measured the leg being left on the table because that's the one that would show the most hip extension and like what we're actually testing. So for the measurement of hip extension, I did it in 3 trials. I'm obviously only showing one, but it was 3, 4, and 3 on the left side, and then 5, 4, and 5 on the right side. So the way that I tested this, the normative values, would be that I watched for the thigh to remain on the table, watch for the lower back to make sure that it didn't arch, and that if the pelvic didn't like rotate or tilt, and that the leg that was being extended remained in line with the body, meaning no lateral movement. So here's where I was talking about the asymmetry index calculation. I felt with smaller numbers, it became a larger percentage because of the smaller numbers. So 40% I don't feel is as accurate in showing her actual like asymmetry between each of her sides. So my notes were that the individual followed all the guidelines and fell within the normative range for the hip flexibility. However, an asymmetry index of 40% was recorded, which seems unusually high, and likely due to a measurement error. Upon review, it was noted that her leg was freely hanging, which you could see in the images, which may have affected the angle and created an inaccurate reading. The unsupported hanging position could have altered the natural resting position of the leg, leading to inconsistent measurements. Despite this, her overall results indicates normal hip mobility with no major restrictions observed. Future assessments should use proper stabilization of the leg to obtain more accurate readings. Now, this was the second version of the Thomas test where I was measuring the rectus femoris. Now, this was her right side being tested, and then this was her left side being tested. Now again with the results, this being the second version of the Thomas test, testing the rectus femoris. I did have measurements of the hip extension in 3 different trials. The first one being of the left being 5, 5, and 5, and then the right side being 3, 4, and 4. So normative values, yet again, we were looking for actual signs rather than numbers, that the thigh should remain on the table. If it did lift, that means that the hip extensors were tight, and watching for lower back arches to watch if the pelvis rotates or tilts, or the leg being tested should remain in line with the body rather than not, because that would mean no lateral movement should happen. So yet again, we did receive a higher asymmetry calculation, which I don't agree with. I believe she was very flexible on both sides, and I didn't see that much of a difference, but according to calculation there is. I just believe that it being with smaller values, it kind of like messes things up. But for my notes for this, the rectus femoris version of the Thomas test obviously had another asymmetry index of 40%, which was unusually high and maybe due to calculation or measurement error. Since the numbers was relatively small, I feel like any minor differences could have exaggerated the percentage, making the asymmetry seem more significant than it is. Based on normative values, she did not show any clear restrictions. However, I observed that when she did lift her left leg, she did come out of that 90 degree knee flexion, which may have affected the measurement. This could indicate a slight instability or inconsistency in positioning rather than an actual muscle restriction. So to conclude this video, the modified Thomas test is an effective way to assess hip flexor flexibility, especially targeting the iliopsoas, rectus femoris, and the TFL, also known as the tensor fascia latae. Understanding hip mobility is important movement efficiency, injury prevention, and overall lower body function. If the thigh stays level with the table, hip flexor flexibility is within the normal range. However, if the thigh lifts, the lower back arches, or the legs move outwards, it may indicate tightness in the iliopsoas, rectus femoris, or TFL. Addressing any restrictions through targeted stretching, mobility drills, and strengthening exercises can help restore balance and improve performance. Thanks for watching, and I hope you all have a good day.